All right, guys, this is Nate the Farmer right here at the very famous Darnell Farms in Bryson City, North Carolina. And today we're going to talk to you a little bit about frost protection with water. How do we do this and why do we do it? And what's so important about this specific weather event we're talking about today? Well, frost protection happens all over this country. They do it in Florida, they do it in California, they do it in places like Michigan, Georgia, and of course, North Carolina. What are we trying to do? Well, we're trying to get a strawberry crop to come in as early as possible, but to do that, you have to protect against that cold weather that's going to come in and have a tendency to kill those open blooms. Strawberries are an unbelievably resilient crop. I can't express, or I can't even emphasize enough how tough they are, but they're also kind of finicky and fickle, and they have a lot of little things you have to learn about them. They're a perennial, they're not a horticultural crop like you would traditionally think of, like tomatoes or say watermelons or beans. Because they're more of a perennial, something like an ornamental nursery crop, they have all these specific things that have to be thought out from the minute you plant them to the minute you pick them. And frost protection is one of those big things you have to think about. So what are we doing? You see the water behind me, scattering water all over the field. Also putting it on some of the covers we see out there. So we've got multiple ways we can protect this crop from frost and freeze damage in the bloom. The covers themselves, depending on how thick they are, can give you from 1 to 3, 4, even 5 degrees of protection. In other words, if it were just 27 degrees out here and I had really thick covers like I do on it, they'd probably be okay, not a problem. But once you drop below that level of protection, that 4 or 5 degree level of protection that the covers give you, like we are today, well, then you're in the danger zone again, and you're forced to go back to using water as your primary way of protecting against frost damage. Now, what is that water doing? A lot of people ask me that. A lot of people are baffled by the fact that we would take water and put it out when it's sub-freezing temperatures and force the water to freeze, and that would actually keep a crop alive. It kind of baffles people. It's very interesting, and I can see from the outside looking in how odd that would be, that that's the method you use to try to keep a plant alive instead of killing it. So what are we doing? Well, there's a lot of sciencey stuff going into it. Let's talk about the first thing. Well, we know that water and ice and snow, for instance, are really good insulators, okay? They protect you up for actually snow. I mean, think about Inuit people in Alaska and northern Canada. They lived in igloo type structures for years and years because snow has a great insulating factor. Well, ice has a great insulating factor too, but that's not really the reason you use the ice. It's the process of forming ice that gives you this life-saving magic that makes it happen. So the best analogy I give kids all the time is, think about this. Energy can never disappear. That's one of the basic, most interesting laws of physics and the universe, that if energy exists, then it's there, okay? Like, take my hands, I'm moving them, right? Back and forth, okay? I put them together, still moving them, still moving them, still moving them, still moving them. So that's kinetic energy, moving hands. But guess what I'm producing in between my hands now? I can feel it, it feels good. Heat. My hands are warm now. If you had a heat camera on this thing, you can see my hands will be glowing because they're warmer. So I'm turning kinetic energy, moving energy, into friction, into heat energy. But that energy is still there. It didn't dissipate, didn't go anywhere. Another good example would be, say, to kind of emphasize the ice basic, when you make ice cream at the house with Mama or Pop or Mom's homemade ice cream maker, you put the ice in around the bucket, and then you put the salt in around the bucket. Now, why would you put that salt in there? Well, whoever's making it will tell you, we got to melt that ice. Well, if you're melting the ice, wouldn't you be warming it up? That kind of thing comes to your mind? No. Melting the ice actually makes it colder. And that's the basic here. It's the 180 degree inverse of that makes this work. We're taking liquid water and we're making it into a solid. Liquid fusion, it's called. Not the fusion you think about when you on comic novels and you know, different types of fantasy stuff and sci-fi. What's happening here is, because energy can never disperse and never go away, water itself has energy in it. It has heat energy in it. It actually has BTUs. And when you take it and it freezes, you're not actually adding cold to water to make it into a solid. You're taking the heat away from it. And because energy cannot go away, it cannot disappear, it has to go someplace, it has to change form. In this case, that heat energy from the water comes out of the water as it freezes and goes into the bloom. Specifically the bloom, not just the plant so much, but the bloom. And that actually keeps that bloom above the freezing temperature for the time period that you are freezing ice. Now there's a couple parameters you have to follow. Number one, the colder it is, the more water you have to put out. And once you're below sub-freezing, and you're in that danger zone of where you can freeze the plant or freeze the blossom or the bloom, you can never, ever, ever stop applying the water. It has to continue to keep freezing and freezing and freezing. That's why when you come out and see this the day after we've done it in the morning, when we're all tired and about ready to fall asleep from watching it and maintaining it, there'll be huge balls of ice all over the plants because we've had to continue to overnight, over the period of cold weather, freeze that ice, layer after layer after layer. And that's just basic frost protection. Today is a very unique thing that only happens every so many years. Matter of fact, it's probably been about a decade since I've seen it like this. And what we have is what this thing is showing you right here. A lot of wind. Now this is barely moving, but in a few minutes when a big gust comes by, this thing will start spinning like crazy. They're expecting somewhere in the area of 16 mile per hour gusts of wind today. What's the problem there? Well, going down the road on a hot day, drinking on your cold soda pop or your cold glass of water, your hands all wet from the condensation, you put your hand out the window, wind goes by, what happens to your hand? It gets colder. Put a shirt on after you've been swimming on a hot day, you walk out here and a breeze comes by, all of a sudden you get really cold. Why is that? Evaporation. We call that evaporative cooling. Because when this water is being scattered through the air and a big gust of wind comes by, look right here, here it comes. When these big gusts of wind come through, they actually cool it down even farther. Well, what's that tell us? What do we do to try to fix that? Well, number one, we have to get the water going before the wind gets here because we know we're going to drop the temperature and to a dangerous level because when we throw water out there, we're actually going to force the temperature down because of the wind combination. So we cranked the water up this morning before it got too cold. That was the number one rule. We also had a little snow to give us a little bit of an insulative factor. Not a lot, not as much as we wanted. Then, there's one real bad negative that wind brings that we don't think about sometimes, but it always sneaks up on us. We've already had to deal with it once, and we'll be dealing with it for the rest of today and tonight and into tomorrow, is that the mechanics of an irrigation system, okay? You can't see it from here. We'll go up and look in a minute. These little guns kicking, well, they're kicking like crazy, and they're creating a little mist around the guns as they irrigate, okay? Well, that wind's coming by and it's blowing that. Well, water is going to freeze to anything that's out here, correct? And now, if you ever been around, like, you ever watched The Christmas Story when they have the little boy stick his tongue up against the pole, you know, stuck and can't get it loose because he touches that frost. Anybody, you'll know that ice tends to really stick to metal well. Well, these guns are made out of metal. They start collecting ice on them, and that would really be a massive problem for something like this. So we take measures to try to limit that amount of ice building up. One of those measures is to take, right there, Junior, you got ice on it? So Junior's out there right now actually walking out to that particular gun because it's beginning to ice up for the second time today. And I'll start building a ball of ice around the back side of that hammer. So the hammer looks like this. You got one side the water's coming out and it's kicking. It's got a counterweight on the back to help it control the amount of kick. Well, all that splashing of water tends to get ice on the back side. They don't form much ice on the front because moving water not only has friction to create heat, it's also knocking away the ice. But on the back, there's nothing to knock that ice away. So it builds up. So we take white lithium grease, which is a waterproof grease. We coat the back of that hammer on the back, and that makes it where the ice can't stick to the metal. It's still formed back there, but it won't stick to the metal. Then periodically, almost about every hour now, from this point onward, for the next probably 30 hours, we'll have to go out here, take a stick, something light, and very carefully, very gingerly, remove the ice by tapping it away. And these particular guns we're using now, they have a spring that's encased in a red top. So it keeps the spring from getting too cold and too icy, which really can throw you into major problems. Some of our older guns out here, some of our older equipment, it doesn't have that red cap. And the ice will actually start forming up inside the grooves of the spring. That's the big problem. because it can shut the gun down, okay? And when that gun can no longer turn, the other guns are dumping water on it. It starts building ice around the whole gun. I've seen guns develop an ice, look like a softball on them. So our job, once we have the system running good, for these pumps that we built and maintained and taken care of, and all the pipes are hooked up good, we spent the last 3 or 4 days double checking and triple checking and put grease on all the guns, is to then monitor, keep an eye on. We'll split the crew up, 4 and 5 of us all around the field watching and looking for problems. That's just the ice. We still have mechanical issues where a sprinkler will stop working, or one of them will break and away it'll go and fly off, and we'll have to go out and stop the line and put it in. We only have so many minutes before the cold temperatures can kill the crop. But that's our main job, is to monitor. Real easy to do at 12 in the middle of the day, not so easy to do at 12 in the middle of the night, or maybe 6 in the morning when it's really cold. So we're gonna take you out here and show you a little of this right now. You get a chance to see this stuff actually forming ice. What you'll also see is as we walk, you'll hear the crunching of the ice, because we've built about a ½ an inch of ice on the crop so far. And don't just imagine after 24 hours just how much ice is going to be out here. This is the best example we're going to be able to give you before the water hits us in the back of the head. As you can see, that white lithium grease is underneath this ice, and we've got it coated in places we know there's going to be a problem. Then there's this red shell keeping the ice on top of this from getting inside the spring. That's keeping the gun spring loaded to kick. Okay, so Audrey's going to take her little stick right here and very gingerly, very easily chip away the ice. All right, so now she took her stick and she's very easy about it. The reason she's so easy is I have a lot of these homemade plastic risers, and even though they can handle high pressure, they're very tender and they can break. Okay, so you can't just go smacking the gun, because these things, not only are they expensive, they tend to be fragile. Cold metal can break a lot easier, plastic breaks really easy. This whole system is a complex combination of old, wore-out stuff that we've refurbished. And we were able to buy some new guns right here, but we still have to be careful with them because we can only afford so many. Because even though I wish I were a very rich, lucrative making farmer, I'm really just an old family farmer who just makes enough money to barely get by. So there you go. There's a de-ice gun. We'll come back out in an hour and get the ice off of it again. As you can see behind me, the crew's going to work their way all the way across the field, checking every single gun. We'll work our way out. There are 11 lines in this field. Once it's done, they'll get about an hour break, not to come back and do it again. And as we get colder and wetter, the increments of time they have to be clean gets closer and closer and closer. It's a lot of hard work, but it's really worth it in the long run, because you get to see a bunch of kids out here enjoying sweet strawberries in the spring of the year. One of the major parts of any irrigation system, especially when you're frost protecting, is your pumping method. If I could pump with an electric 3-phase pump, I would do that, because you can get massive amount of horsepower out of a relatively small 3-phase pump. But I don't have the ability to get 3-phase power at this particular part of the farm, so we're forced to use combustion engine. We use a 6-cylinder 6404D 404 cubic inch John Deere engine turning a Berkeley pump. That's what you see right there behind those pallets. And then as a backup, we're using our little project pump, our Gorman Rupp 53 model I think it is, hooked to another John Deere tractor. It's a PTO driven pump. It uses a spline shaft that comes out of the back of the tractor to turn the pump. Real good for something you need to move around and take away and come back. The biggest problem with this particular crop was we knew we had such a large crop compared to what we had 2 or 3 years ago. We were afraid with one pump wouldn't make enough water, or we were going to have to overwork that particular pump. So what we do, we paralleled 2 pumps. We took one pump with a suction line in the river and took another pump and a suction line in the river, and we were sucking water out of the river, spinning it up with volume and pressure, and then shoving it both into the same line. Is it the most efficient method? Not necessarily, but it's a lot more efficient than trying to overwork a single pump. So you'll be able to see both pumps working over there. There's some specific things you need to know about, things that I know that I'm always looking for. Number one, you're monitoring your heat of your engine, because they have to run for a long period of time. I have to monitor how my pumps are reacting, the heat coming off the cases of the pumps, because they have bearings and gears inside them, and they have to be cooled and sealed and lubricated in different ways. One of them is an oil-cooled pump. with a liquid water that runs through the oil. The other is a gear grease pump where the gears actually have grease fittings and you pump grease in every morning before you run it, and that keeps them lubricated enough that they don't overheat. And there's a lot of little things like the packing and the mechanical seals on the pumps. That's the part where the shaft goes from the tractor through the pump and into the impala that creates that centrifugal force that makes the water come out. That has to be sealed in a very specific way, and it's different for both pumps. So I have to monitor that. And then when I get down there, I can smell things, I can hear things, I can tell. I can stand right here and listen to that pump or that tractor and tell if there's something wrong. If I get a little closer and I start to smell, I go, okay, that smells like hot grease, or that smells like that's gear oil, something's going on. Or I can smell a belt burning. I tend to mount myself up. I'll put my truck right down here in this corner of the field, and where I can post up and watch the whole field while the other crew go out to their respective positions and watch. So I'm down here so I can listen to that pump. These are my babies, you know. I spent a lot of time with them for the last 20 years, so I just know little things about them. You'll be able to look and see the packing leaking. That's the seal on the orange pump. It's to turn drips water, slowly drips water, and that keeps that packing cool. You'll be able to see me place my hand on the casings of both the orange pump to feel the heat coming from the bearings, and then go over to the blue pump and feel the heat from the bearings on it, because the heat coming from those bearings is okay to a degree. I have a miking thermometer. If I feel like it's becoming a problem, I'll use the thermometer to check it. But for the most part, some warmth is okay. But if they start getting hot, for some reason the lubrication's not functioning properly, we can get into some real problems. I've had experiences out here throughout the years where I had to run these pumps even when they weren't right. We were overheating, the motor's running too hard. One of the biggest problems we have in these fields is we're pumping out of the river. And if it comes a big precipitation storm like it did the last few days, it can stir up trash in the river. And then that trash will come up against the screen we have in the river where the pipe's stuck in the water, clog it up, and then you can only pump so much enough water. You can only pump the amount of water that you're pulling out of the river, okay? So if something's restricting your ability to pull it, you're in big trouble. So on one of the pumps out here, we have a very new addition, which is a water-fed cleaning system that actually uses some of the water that is pumping to keep the trash forced away. On the older blue pump, we don't have that upgrade because I can only afford one. So you'll see it only has a straight pipe into the river, but we improved our screening material so that it actually could filter better and not be as restrictive in case it got plugged by using a different type of metal. So we've done everything that we felt like we could do with the budget that we had to work with to improve our system and make it as foolproof as possible. But as anybody will tell you, a plan's only as good as the minute it goes wrong. So even though we planned and checked and double checked and triple checked the system, sooner or later something's going to break. It always happens. The trick is having a very good team of people like I do here. Junior, Mike, Chris, Audrey, Afton, the crew of Fernando and Jose and Emmanuel, when they come to help me. All these individuals have a stake in this strawberry crop. Not only about making sure the kids have something yummy to eat, it's about making sure their kids have clothes on their back, can go to school, they can have a relatively high quality of life. But guess what? It takes a lot of work. Here's what I want you guys to take away from this. When you go into your classrooms at school and you learn about physics and science, history, because people have done this for a long time and that's how I learned it. You go into your math class, and you go into your you go into your ag classes, your horticulture classes. Pay attention, because not only are you going to learn things you're going to use year in and year out on whatever you do, especially if you become a farmer like me, a horticulture farmer, someone who has to fight this frost, but you're going to understand how applicable this kind of thing is. And how much fun it can be, okay? It can be miserable too, don't get me wrong. I've had a lot of long nights out here when I was wishing I was somewhere else. But I've also got a big, amazing family and a great team of people that work together really well, and they care about it. And when you care about it like this, and you know that it's important, you find a way to make it fun. You find a way to get past all the hard, grueling days, and you learn how to keep the most important thing in your life sacred, which is life and love and happiness and working and being part of this team. So remember, science is good, take these lessons you learn, do something with them. Keep listening to your teachers, because hopefully they'll teach you how to do this better than I learned how to do it. See you guys.